If that dog bites me, I swear I'm suing the whole shelter, I muttered, mostly to myself, as I stood frozen in front of Kennel 19. I hadn't meant for it to come out so harsh, but the words slipped out anyway. A woman walking by with a mop paused, giving me a long look, one eyebrow arched. "He won't bite," she said, her voice steady. "He's just ... different. The word lingered in the air like a quiet challenge. I'd volunteered at enough shelters to know what different meant. It meant the dog had been there too long. It meant the staff had run out of gentle words. It meant nobody wanted him and nobody knew how to change that dot behind the chain link door. The dog sat perfectly still, no barking, no pacing, just watching. His fur was a wild tapestry of greys and tans, long around the ears and patchy along his sides, as if someone had tried to sculpt a wolf from a storm cloud and abandoned the effort halfway. One eye was misty, like frosted glass, while the other gleamed bright and golden, sharp with something unreadable. Not fear, not anger, something softer. Curiosity, maybe. I took a step closer. He didn't growl, didn't cower, just studied me, silent and still. "What's his name?" I asked. The woman shrugged. "Tag just says Whisper," came in with it. No chip, no records, nothing. Whisper. The name didn't fit him at all. But I wasn't here to rename dogs. I was here because I'd told my brother I was finally ready to adopt again. 2 years had passed since I lost Copper, my golden retriever, and for the longest time, I hadn't believed I could ever fill that empty space in my heart. But time moves forward. Wounds heal us, so everyone kept telling me. I crouched down, peering through the bars. "Hey, Whisper," I said softly. Still nothing, not even a flick of his tail. "I'll give you a minute," the staffer said, then walked off, her mop sloshing against the floor. I stayed there, kneeling like a fool, trying to understand this quiet, watchful creature. He blinked slowly, his head tilting just a fraction, and then I saw it. The tag on his collar wasn't the usual kind. It was round, made of worn brass, like an old coin. I squinted. Something was engraved on it. Leaning closer, I tried to read it. The woman's voice called from down the hallway. "It's the only reason we haven't put him down yet. Put him down." The words hit me like a punch to the chest. I fumbled for my phone, flicked on the flashlight, and aimed it through the bars. The tag read, "If you're reading this, I was loved once." A lump rose in my throat. "Come on, Whisper," I whispered. "Let's get you out of here." He didn't move. The staffer returned with a set of keys. "You sure about this one?" "Yeah," I said, not looking. Away from him. She unlocked the kennel door slowly. Whisper didn't lunge, didn't bolt. He stood, his joints creaking like an old wooden floor, and stepped forward with the calm of a creature who knew there was no need to rush. The hallway fell silent even. The other dogs, who had been barking moments before, went quiet. He stopped beside me and simply stood there, waiting. I reached down, my hand hovering over his tangled fur for a heartbeat before finally resting on his head. He didn't flinch. Then the softest brush of his tail against my ankle, so light I almost missed it. Outside, the winter sun was blinding, the kind of bright that made the world feel scrubbed clean. I opened the passenger door of my truck. "Up you go." He glanced at the seat, then back at me. "You're not heavy," I said, "and I've lifted heavier." He stepped up as if he'd done it 100 times before, curling into the seat with a quiet sigh. We drove home in silence, the only sound the steady rhythm of his breathing. At the house, he took one slow tour of the living room, sniffing each corner like he was memorizing the scent. Then he stopped in front of Copper's old bed. "You can have it," I said. I kept it clean. He circled once, twice, then lay down with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of years. I sat on the couch, unsure what came next. The room felt different, warmer, somehow. Night. He didn't bark, didn't whine, just Slept the next morning. I made eggs. He didn't beg, just sat by the kitchen door, patient as sunrise. You're polite, I told him. I'll give you that. His ears twitched. Days passed, each one a little less quiet than the last. He began following me from room to room, waiting outside the bathroom, standing by the garage door. He walked beside me on the leash without pulling, as if he'd always known the way. One morning, I gave him a proper bath. Underneath the grime, his fur was a rich golden brown, streaked with white. He looked 10 pounds lighter, but still not a whisper. Definitely not a whisper, I muttered. The vet ran her hands over him, checked his joints, his teeth. He's old, she said. Maybe 10, maybe more. He's been through something, but he's healthy as any senior mutt could be. Senior. I started buying him soft chews and joint supplements, watching as his steps grew quicker, his eyes brighter, but he still didn't bark. Not once. One night I dug through a box of coppers, old things photos, notes from neighbors. At the Bothank, I found a worn-out tennis ball. I rolled it across the floor. Whisper watched it go. Then he looked at me, walked over, and nudged it back. It was the first time I'd laughed out loud in weeks. His tail wagged and he did it again. A week later, we visited the park. I sat on a bench, Whisper by my side. A young couple walked past, their toddler clutching an ice cream cone. The kid stumbled, the cone tumbling to the ground, and immediately burst into tears. Whisper stood up, ambled over, and sat politely in front of the sniveling child. With deliberate care, he licked the fallen ice cream off the grass. The kid's tears stopped mid-wail, and the mother chuckled. "He's got good manners," she said. I nodded. "He's got a good heart." That night, I reached for his tag again, running my thumb over the worn brass. "If you're reading this, I was loved once. You still are," I whispered. He rested his head on my foot, his weight warm and steady. I didn't move for a long time. The next morning, I called the shelter. "I want to cover the adoption fee for the next 3 senior dogs," I told them. Because of Whisper, the staffer hesitated. Because someone loved him enough to leave that message. And now, it's my turn. She was quiet for a moment. Then, softly, "We just got a 12-year-old beagle in no tag, no name. Think someone like you will come for him too." "I hope so," I said. "I really hope so." That evening, as I sat on the porch with Whisper beside me, I tilted my head back to watch the stars. He snored gently, one paw twitching in his sleep. I reached down, fingers combing through his fur, until they brushed that old brass tag. "Loved once, now loved again." And that was just the beginning. Whisper barked. Not a full-throated bark, not even a proper one more, like a muffled woof, as if he'd surprised even himself. Afterward, he blinked up at me, his expression sheepish, like he'd accidentally knocked over a glass and wasn't sure if he was in trouble. "You've got a voice," I said. Setting down my coffee, his ears twitched. "Took you long enough. It had been just over a month since I'd brought him home." The silence that once clung to him like a heavy winter coat had slowly begun to loosen. He made noises, now soft grunts when he settled into bed, little puffs of breath as he watched squirrels from the porch. And today, his first real attempt at a bark. I scratched under his chin. "You're figuring it out, huh?" He licked my wrist, then wandered to the window, resting one paw on the sill. Outside, the neighborhood was hushed, snow lining the curbs in untouched white drifts. His tail swayed slowly, content. I hadn't planned to keep his name, but Whisper had stuck. Maybe it wasn't the name I would have chosen, but he responded to it in his own quiet way. More importantly, he'd started responding to me. We had our routines now. Morning walks to the mailbox, slow afternoon strolls around the cul-de-sac, evenings on the couch, where he seemed to tolerate, or maybe even enjoy, my muttered commentary during documentaries. And once a week, we drove to the park where we were headed now. "Come on, old man," I said, grabbing his leash. He trotted over, a slight bounce in his step. I clipped the leash on, and he was already at the door before I'd finished. The truck ride was quiet, as usual. I talked, he listened. At the park, Whisper walked like he owned the place, not with arrogance, but with the ease of someone returning to a familiar haunt. He sniffed every bush like he was checking in on old friends, nodded at other dogs like they were acquaintances. Most ignored him. A few barked from a distance. One small white poodle mix tried to bound up to him, but Whisper let out a short, low growl, not threatening, just firm. He's got boundaries, I explained to the owner, a man in his 60s, with a thick flannel coat. The man grinned. That's rare. Most dogs his age get too soft. Whisper led me to our usual bench near the pond, where ducks huddled on the frozen surface. He didn't sit right away, just stood there, staring at the water dot. You used to come here, didn't you? I asked. He didn't look at me, but his ears flicked once. It was a hunch. Something about the way he moved, no hesitation, like he knew every path by heart. I studied him, trying to picture him younger, more spring in his step, fewer scars on his nose, maybe a little boy beside him once, or a man, or both. That tag meant someone had loved him deeply enough to speak for him when he had no voice. I sat down. Whisper finally did too, pressing his side against my leg. We stayed like that until the cold seeped through my jacket. On the drive back, I stopped by the local hardware stores, the kind with creaky floors and hand-painted signs. I needed brackets for the porch steps, but I figured I'd let Whisper have his say about the place. Stay, I told him, cracking the window. He stayed. No barking, no whining, just waiting. Inside, the clerk recognized me. You're the guy with the shaggy dog. That's me. He's something. My niece volunteers at the shelter said you saved his life. I shrugged. He saved mine too. Probably she. Handed me the brackets and leaned forward. You should come to the community event Saturday. Seniors are bringing their adopted dogs for a little meet. It's nothing big, just folding chairs and coffee. He doesn't really like crowds neither. Do most of the dogs. That's the point. When I got back to the truck, Whisper was sitting taller, watching the door. We've got an invite, buddy. You feel like being social this weekend? He sneezed. I'll take that as a maybe. At home, I noticed the silence again, not the heavy kind, but a comfortable one, like the pause in a story right before the best part. The following Friday night, I gave Whisper another bath, brushing him out until he looked more like a proper dog and less like a windblown tumbleweed. His coat, once patchy and rough, had grown softer since the day I found him, the bare spots slowly filling in like a meadow after rain. He still had one cloudy eye, but the other gleamed with something new, maybe light, maybe trust. You ready for Saturday? I asked. He licked his paw and ignored me. Saturday morning arrived with frost painting, delicate patterns on the windows, and the distant rumble of salt trucks rolling through the streets. I packed a thermos of steaming coffee and an old, well-loved blanket for the folding chairs. Whisper hopped into the truck as if it were just another ordinary day. The event was held at the edge of the park, near the rec center. A dozen or so people stood, bundled in coats and scarves, holding leashes, or tossing tennis balls. Every dog there moved gently, some with limps, one in a little wheelchair. Then I spotted the familiar flannel-coated man from the park. He waved. Glad you came. What's his name again? Whisper, I said. The man smiled. Looks better already. We stood together, making quiet small talk, while Whisper sat calmly beside me, watching the other dogs with quiet curiosity. He didn't approach anyone, didn't try to play, but he didn't shrink back either. One of the organizers handed me a Polaroid camera. Mind if we take a picture for the board? We're starting a wall of second chances. I glanced down at Whisper. Smile, old man. He didn't, of course, but he tilted his head in that curious way of his as the camera flashed. They wrote our names at the bafank of the photo, and clipped it to a corkboard beneath a sign that read, "Found each other." We didn't stay long. After half an hour, Whisper gave me a look that clearly said, "We're done here." On the way home, we stopped at the corner store. I let him pick a toy from the little rack by the counter. He sniffed a squeaky rubber chicken, a plush squirrel, and finally settled on a stuffed star with a stitched-on smiley face. I wasn't sure why he chose it, but he carried it gently in his mouth all the way to the truck. That night, he lay on the rug, chewing the star, slowly nod with wild excitement. But like he was savoring it, I poured myself a drink and sat beside him. "You know," I said, "you could have ended up anywhere, and yet here we are." He paused, looked up at me, and dropped the toy. Then, for the first time, he did something he'd never done before. He rested, his head in my lap. I held perfectly still, not wanting to break the spell. We stayed like that until the ice in my glass melted away. Sunday morning, I woke up too early even for me. Whisper was still asleep, curled tightly into Copper's old bed. I made coffee and stood by the fridge, studying the photo from the event, now held in place by a bone-shaped magnet. I wondered who had loved him before. What kind of life had he known? What kind of people had given him that tag? Maybe it didn't matter. He was here, now safe, warm, wanted. But the thought lingered. Later that day, I made a call. "Hi," I said to the shelter director. "Do you still have Whisper's intake records?" "Not much, just what was on the tag." "Can I see it?" "The tag? You have it, I mean." "The back?" We'd never looked. I checked. The back was nearly worn smooth, but under the right light, I saw Itan, address, faded, scratched, but still legible. "Not far," I told Whisper, even though he probably didn't understand. "We're going on a road trip, Hank, or Row. He lifted his head just to see, nothing more. The next morning, we drove west just 20 miles, through winding back roads, past the edge of town. The address led to a farmhouse not run down, not pristine, but lived in. A man in his 70s stepped onto the porch as we pulled in. He carried a cane, and a deep furrow creased his brow. "Can I help you?" I got out slowly. Whisper stayed in the truck. "Sorry to bother you," I said. "I adopted a dog a while back. Found your address on his old tag." The man's expression didn't change, not at first. He's got one cloudy eye, shaggy coat, answers to Whisper. The man stepped forward slowly. "You brought him. He's in the truck." The man walked closer. I opened the door. Whisper sat, watching then. His ears perked. The old man said one word, "Tucker," and Whisper, "Win not." A sad sound, not scared, just recognition. I opened the door wider. Whisper stepped out, walked up to the man, sniffed his shoes, and then leaned against his leg. The man dropped his cane. He didn't foul, just knelt, both hands buried in Whisper's fur. "He was my son's," he said, voice rough. "My boy died 4 years ago. I couldn't take care of Tucker after that. I tried, but I wasn't right. One day, he ran off. I figured he was gone for good." He looked at me. "You called him Whisper." I nodded. "Doesn't matter," he said. "He knows you now." Whisper roared. Tucker looked between us, his tail giving a single, slow wag. I didn't know what to say, so I told the truth. He saved me too. We stayed a while, talking. Before we left, the man gave me a photo. Tucker and his son, years younger, both smiling. It sat on my dashboard all the way home. Whisper didn't seem confused, didn't seem torn, just tired. That night, he curled up in his bed and slept like he hadn't in weeks. I looked at the old photo, young man in his 20s, arms wrapped around a younger, brighter-eyed Whisper, both of them grinning. "You were loved," I said softly. Whisper opened one eye and wagged his tail. He had taken to sleeping with one, paws stretched out toward the hallway, like he was halfway to getting up, but not quite ready. Every morning, I'd find him just like that. Every morning, his soft, rhythmic snores filling the room. his nose twitching as if chasing dream rabbits through fields only he could see. The photo of him with the boy, his first owner, still sat on my bookshelf, right beside Copper's old collar. I'd thought about changing his name back to Tucker, just once. But when I called it out, he didn't even lift his head. When I said Whisper, though, his ears perked up. So Whisper he stayed. Maybe names didn't mean as much to dogs as they did to us. Maybe it was the voice behind them that truly mattered. Tuesday morning, I made oatmeal, stirring in a spoonful of peanut butter before setting the bowl down for him. He licked it once, then shot me a look like, "Really? This is the breakfast special?" "Just trying something new," I laughed. He settled beside me as I read the paper, not out of interest, I assumed, but because he liked resting his head against my foot. That small contact had become part of our routine, a silent way of saying, "I'm here, you're here, we're fine." That afternoon, we took our usual walk down M Street. The snow had finally melted, leaving the sidewalks damp and gleaming, and the air carried the faintest whisper of spring, just enough to make you forget winter wasn't quite done yet. Whisper trotted ahead, pausing every few steps to inspect. A fire hydrant, or I, a squirrel with deep suspicion. Near the coffee shop, a girl sat hunched on a bench, wiping her eyes with her sleeve. She couldn't have been more than 10. Her backpack lay open beside her, notebooks and pencils scattered in the slush. Whisper tugged toward her before I could stop him. "Hey," I said gently, trying to steer him back. But the girl looked up and Whisper froze. He stood perfectly still, tail down but ears tipped forward. The girl stared at him, then slowly, hesitantly, reached out a hand. Whisper took a step closer, then another. Her fingers brushed his head, light and uncertain, as if she wasn't sure he was real. Then, just like that, she smiled small. "But there, his name's Whisper," I said. She didn't answer, just kept petting him. After a moment, she whispered, "He's not scared of me, not one bit." She looked down. "Most dogs don't like me. Mum says I move too fast." "Whisper's a slow guy," I said. "Likes quiet, good at sitting still." She smiled again. "I like sitting still too. People don't think I do, but I do." We stood there in comfortable silence until a woman came rushing round the corner, her face pale with worry. "Emily," she called. The girl Emily looked up. "I'm here." The woman dropped to her knees, wrapping an arm around her shoulders, her eyes flicking between me and Whisper. "I've been looking everywhere. Are you okay?" Emily nodded. "I was just with the dog. He's friendly," I offered. The woman exhaled, glancing at Whisper. "She gets overwhelmed sometimes. Walks off when she needs space." "I get that," I said. Emily gave Whisper one last scratch behind the ears. "Bye, Whisper." He wagged his tail once as they walked away. I felt him lean against my leg, warm and solid. "Yeah," I said, ruffling his fur. "You're a therapy dog, whether you like it or not." That night, I did something I hadn't done in years. Opened the old chest in the garage. Copper's things were still inside. Leashes, chewed up tennis balls, a few crayon drawings from my nephews, and a yellow raincoat that had never fit any dog quite right. Beneath it all was his worn-out therapy vest, the one he'd worn when we visited the retirement home together, back when I thought volunteering would stitch up the holes inside me. Whisper padded in and sat beside the box, watching. "You ever want a job?" I asked. He sniffed the vest, but didn't chew it. Just sat there, steady. That night, I looked up the local therapy dog program. They had orientations every other month. I filled out the form, didn't submit it, just saved it as a draft. Whisper lay beside the couch, his head heavy on my socked foot, his breathing slow and even. The next few days passed in their usual rhythm: morning walks, coffee, afternoon porch sitting. But I started noticing new things. How Whisper would pause outside certain houses, always the ones with wind chimes. He'd tilt his head, listening until the last note faded. Saturday morning, I took him back to the park. We passed the bench by the pond, the one where we'd met Emily. He sniffed it, circled once, then moved on. This time, he didn't stop. He wanted to keep going, so I let him lead. We ended up at the little footbridge that crossed the stream, at the far end of the trailer spot I usually avoided. Too quiet, too far out. Whisper stepped onto the bridge, paused, and peered down at the water. Then he barked just once, sharp and clear. I leaned over the railing. A single duck floated. Below, probably late to migrate. Whisper stared at it like it owed him money. You tell him, I chuckled. We sat on the bench just past the bridge, the one with the plaque that read, "For those who waited." Whisper stretched out at my feet as I sipped my coffee. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of pine, and an older man in a jogging suit slowed as he passed. "That's your dog?" he asked. "Yes, sir," he smiled. "Looks like someone brought a heart back to life." I nodded. He gave a little wave and kept going. Sunday evening, I heard a knock at the door. A boy stood there. The boy at the door couldn't have been more than 16. His eyes, nervous but earnest. He clutched a brown envelope in both hands. "Are you the guy with the dog?" Whisper, "I am. My grandfather said you came by last week. Said you had his son's dog." I nodded. He held out the envelope. "He wrote this for you. Said you should have it." Before I could say much else, he turned and walked off, his footsteps fading down the porch steps. Inside the envelope was a letter, handwritten in careful, looping script. He wrote about his son, about how they used to go to that same park together, how Whisper or Tucker, back then, would wait by the front door every evening at 5, tail thumping against the floorboards, no matter the rain or snow. When I lost my son, the letter read, "I couldn't handle losing the dog to POI. Made a mistake. I let him go. You gave him what I couldn't. At the boot thunk, a single line. Thank you for letting an old dog believe again." I folded the letter carefully and placed it in the box with the photograph. Whisper nudged my elbow with his wet nose, as if sensing the weight of the moment. "You ready for bed?" I asked, scratching behind his ear. He stretched, yawned, and ambled down the hall. But later that night, I found him not in his bed, but curled up outside my bedroom door, close, but not too close. Maybe it was the letter, or the memories it carried, or just the way the wind sighed through the trees outside. But something inside me shifted. Not closure, not quite, but peace. And in the morning, I opened that saved email draft. Hit submit. Whisper's second act was about to begin. The wind still carried winter's last whispers when Whisper and I arrived for our first therapy dog orientation. The community center sat tucked between a post office and an insurance agency, in a part of town so quiet it felt like time moved slower there. Whisper hopped out of the truck with more confidence than I expected, his nose already working overtime as we approached the building. Inside, warmth wrapped around us like a thick quilt. Folding chairs lined the walls, a coffee urn hissed in the corner, and half a dozen dogs lounged at their owner's feet, one graying round the muzzle, each one carrying the quiet dignity of age. Whisper moved through the room like he was visiting old friends, pausing to sniff an elderly pug who offered a half-hearted tail wag in return. A woman with silver hair and bright red glasses greeted us with a clipboard. "You must be Whisper," she said warmly. I smiled. "Guess I'm just the chauffeur." She grinned and handed me a form. "We'll keep it informal today. Just want to see how he interacts, how he handles stimulation." "You'll do great," I murmured to Whisper. He sat beside me, calm but alert, when someone knocked over a stack of handouts, sending papers fluttering across the tile floor. He didn't flinch, just watched with mild curiosity. For the next hour, we moved through stations set up around the room. One had a vacuum cleaner, humming at low volume. Whisper walked past it without a second glance. Another held a child-sized doll seated in a wheelchair, where volunteers simulated conversation and gentle petting. Whisper approached, sat down, and rested his chin on the doll's footrest, like he'd done it 100 times before. "He's got a gift," the red glasses woman said. "Didn't train him, no. Nope, he trained me." At the end of the orientation, we were handed a pamphlet and a list of local places open to visits. Nursing homes, libraries, support groups. I thanked the staff and led Whisper back to the truck. "Guess you're officially semi-retired," I said, ruffling his fur. "Time to give back, huh?" He barked one soft but clear. Our first visit was scheduled for the following Thursday. I chose the library a reading program for children with anxiety or speech delays. The idea was simple. Kids would read aloud to therapy dogs. No fear of judgment. Whisper had never been around groups of children before. Well, except for Emily on the bench. But if that moment meant anything, I knew he'd handle it just fine. That morning, I brushed him until his coat shone. He'd endured a bath the night before. Grudgingly, I fastened the soft blue vest they'd given us, labeled in white letters, "Therapy Dog in Training." At the library, we were directed to a colorful corner with beanbag chairs and shelves filled with dog-themed picture books. A boy named Theo was the first to sit across from us, his book trembling slightly in his hands. Whisper lay down, his head resting near the boy's shoes, tail flicking every now and then. Theo glanced at him, then at the book. He started quietly. Whisper blinked. The boy read slowly, stumbling over words. I stayed silent. Whisper didn't move. By the end of the session, Theo had read 5 full pages without a single correction. He smiled as he closed the book. "I think he listened," Theo said. "I know he did," I replied. Each week after that, we returned. Different kids, different books, but always the same quiet presence from Whisper. He didn't do tricks, didn't even wag much. He just stayed, steady, unmoving, kind. Word started spreading. One day, a newspaper photographer showed up and asked if he could take a picture for a feature on local volunteers. "Sure," I said, "as long as the flash stays off." The next morning, Whisper's face was on the front page of the local section, beneath the headline, "Old Dog, New Tricks. How One Senior Pup is Changing Livist." Mailman laughed when he handed me the paper. "Your mutt's famous now." I framed the clipping. Whisper sniffed it, once unimpressed. We added a nursing home to our weekly rotation. On Wednesdays, we visited Maple Pines Senior Living. Whisper would stroll through the common area like a beloved mare making his rounds, graciously accepting gentle pets and quiet greetings from residents. But there was one person he always paused for, Walter Finch, a silent man who sat by the window, untouched by the usual chatter of the home. Without fail, Whisper would settle beside him, leaning his warm weight against Walter Finch's leg, remaining perfectly still for the entire visit. No fuss, no movement, just quiet companionship. One afternoon, I overheard a nurse whisper in awe, "He hasn't let anyone sit that close to him in months." The following week, as we prepared to leave, Walter Finch spoke a single word, "Thanks." I wasn't certain if the gratitude was meant for me or Whisper, but it didn't matter. The word lingered in the air, like the last note of a favorite song. Somehow, without fanfare, Whisper had woven himself into the fabric of our town. Children waved excitedly from school buses when they spotted him. Store clerks asked after his well-being during my errands, and the bakery owner left a small paper bag labeled Whisper's Biscuits every Friday, homemade treats with oats and pumpkin. That made his tail thump against the floor in anticipation. At home, he remained his steady, quiet self. We'd spend evenings on the porch, watching clouds paint stories across the sky, his ears twitching like delicate radar dishes, catching every passing breeze. One night, when I dusted off my old guitar, I discovered his love for music. He'd curl up near the amp, eyes half closed in contentment as I stumbled through chords I hadn't played in years. When my brother visited with his boisterous boys, they transformed our yard into a whirlwind of energy, tossing a foam football with reckless abandon. "Will Whisper be okay?" my brother asked nervously. We soon had our answer. When the youngest tripped and skinned his knee, Whisper was there, before any of us, gently nudging the boy's arm with his nose and staying put until the tears dried. "Your dog's got a heart," my brother observed. "Yeah," I agreed. "He borrowed it from someone. Now he's sharing it." That night, for the first time, Whisper slept at the foot of my bed. Remaining there until dawn painted the room in soft light. Our next shelter visit held new purpose. We returned not as adopters, but as volunteers for a program pairing senior dogs with elderly companions. Whisper moved through the kennels with quiet dignity, occasionally stopping to offer a reassuring wag to a nervous resident. When we reached Daisy enclosure, a sweet-faced golden Labrador with cloudy eyes, Whisper planted himself firmly and refused to budge. "No one's looked at her in 2 months," the volunteer confessed. I smiled. Someone's trying to make a point. The following week, we watched Daisy trot happily to her new home with Paul, a retired bus driver who'd recently lost his wife. As the two dogs touched noses in greeting, Daisy tail wagged like a metronome, keeping time to a joyful song. Spring blossomed into summer, coating our porch in a fine dusting of pollen. Whisper took to lounging beneath the maple trees' dappled shade while I mowed the lawn, supervising my work with regal calm. He never chased or barked. His quiet presence was enough. The library's crayon drawing arrived in the mail, a colorful rendering of Whisper beside a stick figure labeled me and my reading buddy, signed by Theo. It joined our growing collection. On the fridge, a gallery of small, precious moments. Some evenings I'd find Whisper gazing out the window, ears perked toward some distant sound only he could hear. I'd join him in comfortable silence, respecting whatever thoughts held his attention. Gradually, I stopped counting days or wondering about Hankaro. Our ordinary moments together felt complete, like a favorite sweater that fits just right. This was the dog every family had passed by, until one tarnished brass tag changed everything. Now he was paying that kindness forward in his own quiet way. Whisper had a gift for turning strangers into neighbors without performing tricks or seeking attention. He simply existed fully in each moment, and in doing so, reminded others to do the same. Nearly 4 months had passed since I'd found him in Kennel 19, and our life had settled into a rhythm that felt timeless. Mornings began slowly, coffee for me, soft chews for him. He no longer shadowed my every step like he feared I might vanish. Now he waited with calm assurance, his tail thumping a lazy greeting when he heard my footsteps. Our therapy visits became the heartbeat of our weeks. Mondays at the library, Wednesdays at Maple Pines, and now Fridays at the Veteran Center downtown. That first day at the center, Whisper paused in the lobby as if recognizing the space. Hal, a man whose fatigue jacket seemed as much a part of him as his own skin, greeted us at the door. "So you're the famous Whisper," he said, lowering himself carefully to one knee. Whisper met him halfway, pressing his nose gently against Hal's knuckles. "He always this calm?" Hal asked, looking up at me. "Pretty much. Good," Hal nodded. "Some of the guys here haven't known calm in a long time." The center smelled of rich coffee and well-worn leather. In one corner, a bearded man played solitaire with intense focus. When Whisper approached, the man didn't speak, but he didn't need to. Whisper simply sat beside him, sharing the quiet like an old friend. After a few quiet minutes, the man at the Veteran Center finally spoke. "You here to listen or judge?" Whisper blinked slowly in response. "Good," the man murmured, his shoulders relaxing. "Me too." By the time we prepared to leave, the staff had already circled our next visit on their calendar. "We'll be here every Friday," I promised, "until someone tells us to stop coming." Whisper gave a single, decisive wag of his tail, his way of sealing the agreement. Back home, our garden demanded attention after the unusually rainy start to summer. The grass had transformed into an emerald carpet, so vibrant it looked painted. I spent Saturday wrestling with weeds, while Whisper supervised from his shady spot by the shed, watching with the wise patience of an old farmer, content to let the land work at its own pace. Our neighbor, Lucas, home after his freshman year of college, wandered over hesitantly. "Mind if I pet him?" he asked. "Not at all, just take it slow." Lucas crouched beside Whisper, who lifted his head just enough to give a polite sniff. "He doesn't even flinch," Lucas observed with a chuckle. "Doesn't see much point in wasting energy, do you, boy?" He stayed a while, the words tumbling out. Finals, uncertainty about his major, the pressure of figuring out his future. Whisper remained still, but his calm presence seemed to give Lucas permission to admit he didn't have all the answers. After Lucas left, I sank onto the back steps beside my old companion. "You're some kind of truth magnet," I told him, brushing dirt from my knees. His ears flicked at the sound of my voice. "Just pull people's real thoughts right out of them." Whisper answered with a contented grunt, stretching his paws across the sun-warmed wood. Sunday dawned with gentle rain tapping lullabies on the roof, filling the air with the clean scent of wet earth. Whisper, never one to rush a rainy day, didn't stir until noon. I joined him on the couch with a long-neglected book, but he'd already drifted back to sleep by the second chapter, his rhythmic snores keeping time with the falling rain. That afternoon, sorting through attic boxes without purpose, I uncovered an album labeled Northridge Cabin. The pages held frozen moments, my brother, our father, and a young copper leaping through snowdrifts, like he could catch the clouds themselves. One photo showed him sprawled before the fireplace, tongue lolling in perfect contentment. I carried the album downstairs to share with Whisper. "This was Copper," I said, tracing the faded image. Whisper studied the photo carefully before resting his chin gently on the album's edge. The next morning's phone call surprised even me. "You think the cabin's still standing?" I asked my brother. "Last we checked it was," he replied. "Why?" "Thinking of taking Whisper up there." "Yeah, you sure? It's a hike. He can handle it." We packed simply: canned goods, warm blankets, Whisper's travel bed. The forecast promised clear skies, and the old access road had held through recent storms. Dawn found us winding along back roads that narrowed with each mile until, by noon, we reached the trailhead. I clipped Whisper's leash and pointed up the overgrown path, ready to see something new. He answered by lifting his nose to the crisp mountain air and leading the way. We took our time, pausing often, not because Whisper tired the fresh air, seemed to energize him, but because my knees protested the incline. Yet we persevered, and there it stood. The cabin, weathered but enduring, its grade would nearly hidden by new growth. The door opened with its familiar groan, revealing a dust-covered but sturdy interior. Whisper investigated every corner, sniffing beneath the worn table, circling the stone fireplace, before finally settling in the exact spot where Copper had lain in that decades-old photo. I built a small fire, heated soup, and sank into the creaky armchair by the window. Whisper claimed his usual position, his head a comforting weight on my boot. That night, we stepped onto the porch to a sky so thick with stars it looked like spilled salt on black velvet. "You've come a long way," I whispered into the cool air. Whisper simply leaned closer, his warmth steady against my leg. Morning revealed the creek behind the cabin, its clear water dancing over smooth stones. Whisper stepped in with surprising grace, lapping at the current before suddenly pouncing at a floating leaf with a playfulness I'd never seen. "You've still got it," I called out, laughing as his surprised barks echoed off the water. His joy was contagious, leaving my sides aching from laughter. We stayed another night, just the crackling fire, the whispering trees, and us. When we finally descended the mountain, something subtle had shifted again. Not dramatically, but like the quiet turning of a well-worn page, the gentle beginning of a new chapter at home. I hung Copper's cabin photo beside Theo's drawing of Whisper. Different dogs, different eras, but the same unspoken bond. That week at Maple Pines, Walter Finch waited for us with unexpected eagerness, holding out a new chair cushion like a piece. Offering thought he might like it, he said, his voice rough with disuse. Whisper took his cushiankery place beside the old man's chair. At the library, Theo read 2 full books without hesitation. "He's my lucky charm," the boy declared proudly. Whisper's tail thumped once in agreement. Friday brought another milestone at the Veteran Center. "Whisper ought to have his own nameplate," Hal declared. "He's not just visiting anymore. He's family." So we made one. A simple wooden plaque reading "Whisper, the Listener" above his favorite chair. I found myself studying that plaque often, pondering what it truly means to listen, to offer nothing but your full presence in someone else's moment. It wasn't an easy gift, but Whisper made it look as natural as breathing. And slowly, more and more people began sitting beside him. The quiet ones, the forgotten ones, those who hadn't felt seen in far too long. And their whispers sat, always steady, always present, like an oak tree that had grown roots right through our lives. By the time July arrived, with its honey-thick air and drowsy afternoons, Whisper had become as much a neighborhood fixture as the old maple trees lining our street. Our walks down Maple Street now required extra time, as someone always stopped us to stroke his velvety ears, to thank him for helping their child at the library, or simply to share a moment of quiet companionship. He greeted each person with that same gentle dignity, one ear tilted thoughtfully as if to say, "I remember what matters." That week, I added a small handmade touch to our porch, a wooden sign carved with my pocket knife that read "Whisper's Rest." Stop, hung with twine beside 2 tin buckets, one filled with dog treats, the other with chilled water bottles. What began as a simple gesture soon became something more. Neighbors started appearing with their dogs in tow, creating a quiet parade of furry visitors. Whisper would hold court at the top of the steps, watching each newcomer with the wise patience of a grandfather welcoming guests to his home. One golden morning, a woman in a sunflower print hat arrived with a scruffy terrier named Milo. As she settled on the Bothang step and Milo explored the yard, Whisper remained on the porch, his chin resting on his paws, eyes half closed in the sunlight. "I think he knows who's here for more than water," she observed softly. I nodded. "He usually does." She took a slow breath. "My husband passed last month. Milo hasn't left my side since, but he's so restless." Before I could respond, Whisper stood and ambled down the steps, not rushing, not hesitating, coming to rest beside Milo. The little terrier immediately curled against him as if they'd always been companions. "That's his way of saying, you're both going to be okay," I told her. She didn't speak, just wiped a tear and smiled in that way people do when they've been understood without having to explain. The following weeks passed in a contented blur of therapy visits, porch guests, and garden chores. Our days felt complete, in a way that needed no explanation. Whisper had found his purpose, and I simply followed his lead. One Wednesday at Maple Pines, Walter Finch pressed an envelope into my hand. Inside was a printed therapy dog bingo card, each square listing simple tasks: make someone smile, lie still for 5 minutes, listen to a memory. "Who made this?" I laughed. "We did," Walter Finch said, nodding toward a group of residents gathered around a puzzle keeps us sharp. Whisper's already got 4 in one visit. The bingo card earned a proud place on our fridge, each checked box representing its own small triumph. At the library, Theo arrived with a fresh haircut and a new book. This time, he didn't fidget or stumble. He read with clear confidence, only glancing at Whisper when encountering longer words. Is he like a statue when I talk? Theo asked curiously. No, I said. He's like a rock in a stream. Holds the story still so you can step right into it. Theo's face lit up. I like that. I'm going to write that down. The veteran center staff began calling Whisper the Doc, Hal saying it with quiet reverence. After one particularly emotional group session, he pulled me aside. You know what he does, Hal said, his voice thick. He lets you remember the good without the bad shouting over it. Most of us don't get that kind of quiet anymore. On the drive home, I glanced at Whisper curled in the passenger seat, his head bobbing gently with each bump in the road. You're becoming famous, you know, I told him. Folks are giving you titles now. He answered with a sleepy grunt, unimpressed by his own celebrity. That Friday brought an unexpected call from a local radio station. We'd love to feature Whisper in our community segment, the producer said. Especially dogs like him who've become local legends. Though hesitant, I agreed. When the crew arrived with microphones and cameras, Whisper remained in his favorite sunspot by the window, unfazed by the attention. As I shared his story, the brass tag, the shelter, all the quiet lives he'd touched, the interviewer asked, "What do you think he remembers from before?" I looked at my old friend, his cloudy eye catching the light. I think he remembers enough to be patient, enough to know when to stay, enough to recognize pain even when it doesn't speak. The segment aired a surprising response. Strangers waved to us on walks. A bakery 2 towns over sent a tin of peanut butter bones labeled, "For our town's quiet hero." Whisper accepted one with ceremonial care, carrying it to his bed like a cherished prize. Then came the call from the shelter, where our story began. We've had 3 senior dogs adopted this month, the director said, warmth coloring her voice. All because of Whisper. Before she could continue, I heard myself say, "There's more, isn't there?" One left, Gruff, 11 years old, bit of an attitude. That Saturday, Whisper and I returned to the shelter. Kennel 19 stood empty now, a small plaque reading Whisper, adopted and adored. In Kennel 7 sat Gruff, all scruff and dignity, one ear permanently cocked, his bark rattling the glass like a challenge. Whisper approached, tail still, body relaxed. Gruff barked again. Whisper simply sat down, as if to say, "I've got all the time in the world." Then, like the slow settling of autumn leaves, Gruff finally sat at the shelter staff, watched with eyes shining like morning dew. "In all my years," one whispered, voice trembling, "I've never seen him sit for anyone." My pen moved smoothly across the adoption papers. Gruff wouldn't be coming home with me, but I knew exactly where he belonged. Hank, a retired mechanic whose hands still carried the faint scent of motor oil, had just moved into assisted living and ached for the comforting rhythm of claws clicking on tile floors. When Hank met Gruff the next day, Whisper stood quietly by my side like a wise old teacher observing his pupil. The 2 dogs circled each other in a slow dance of sniffing and tail wags before settling side by side. Their graying faces turned toward the same sunlit window as if sharing a secret. "Think they'll get along just fine," Hank said, his calloused fingers scratching Gruff's crooked ear with surprising gentleness. "They already are," I replied, watching how their tails thumped in perfect unison against the floor, while Whisper's work in the community blossomed like spring wildflowers. At home, he remained his steadfast self, still curling up in Copper's well-worn bed each night, still resting his chin on my slipper during morning coffee, still gazing out the window with ears twitching to some distant melody only he could hear. One golden afternoon, I opened a fresh journal and began collecting moments like precious stones. Page 1, today. Whisper sat beside a boy whose tears fell like summer rain. He didn't move until the storm passed. No one asked this of him. Page 4. Walter Finch at Maple Pines presented Whisper with a birthday card made from construction paper and stubborn hope. Whisper sniffed it thoughtfully 3 times before using it as a pillow, as if to dream upon its kindness. Page 7. A woman confessed that Whisper's silence gave her the courage to speak her late husband's name aloud for the first time in years. The sound hung in the air between us like a soap bubble catching light. By July's end, my journal held a dozen such treasures. Their purpose wasn't clear, nor did it need to be. They stood as quiet witnesses to how small things, a look, a presence, a moment shared, could reshape a day, a life. Without fanfare or effort, Whisper had become a quiet force of transformation in strangers' lives. And in mine, August arrived wearing a heavy cloak of heat that clung to skin and made the pavement shimmer like a mirage. Whisper took to napping under the porch after breakfast, where the earth stayed cool and breezes visited like shy guests. I'd bring him a bowl of water beaded with ice cubes and pretend to read on the top step, while secretly marveling at how his ears perked up at passing bumblebees, as if keeping track of their important work. Our annual vet visit approached, part of the sacred promise I'd made when signing those life-changing adoption papers. Dr. Penfield's office, understanding Whisper's ways, reserved a quiet hour just for us. He hopped into the truck with surprising spring in his step, his movements more fluid than in recent weeks. I'd learned not to make a production of his good days, just a murmured, "That's my boy," as we set off down familiar roads. "Hello there, Professor," Whisper, Dr. Penfield greeted, kneeling to his level first as always, still teaching us all how to live. He sat patiently while she found that magical spot behind his ears, then followed her to the scale with dignified grace. In the exam room, with its mural of birds in flight, she checked his vitals. Steady heartbeat, slightly stiff joints, one cloudy eye still brimming with quiet wisdom. Teeth looking good, she noted. "Thanks to those dental treats and your careful care. He does most of the work," I said, watching Whisper sit perfectly still for his exam. Dr. Penfield paused, stethoscope dangling. "In this profession, you see every kind of dog, the frightened, the ill, the rambunctious. But Whisper, ... She met my eyes. "He's got presence." "That he does," I agreed, my throat unexpectedly tight. "Whatever you're doing, keep doing it," she said, scribbling in his chart. "And call if anything changes." The smallest thing, on the drive home. Whisper surprised me. He leaned his head out the window for several blocks, letting the breeze comb through his fur before settling back with a contented sigh. Back home, I threw open all the windows, inviting the warm air to drift through the house like a lazy river. Whisper positioned himself perfectly in the hallway's current and was asleep before I could fetch my book. That evening, the library director called. "We're starting a Saturday story circle for children with autism," she explained, voice bright with hope. "Soft lighting, small groups. We want Whisper as our guest of honor." Come Saturday morning, I brushed Whisper's coat, which he endured with dignified resignation, and fastened his therapy vest. The reading room had been transformed, lamps glowing like fireflies, plush cushions forming a nest on the floor, 5 children with their families waiting in quiet anticipation. Whisper entered with quiet assurance, blinked once at the gathering, and chose a central spot. A boy named Mason, about 9, immediately sat beside him, not touching, not speaking, simply being near as the story began, about a dragon who couldn't breathe fire but found other gifts. Something extraordinary unfolded. By the 3rd page, Mason had leaned his head against Whisper's side as naturally as a leaf resting on still water. The boy's mother wiped silent tears. She wasn't alone. When the children took turns reading lines, some stumbling over syllables, some whispering like the wind through reeds, Whisper listened to each with equal attention. Mason never left his side. He's more than a therapy animal. the director murmured as we prepared to leave. He's a bridge. That word stayed with me all week, floating through my thoughts like a feather on a breeze. That night, I added to my journal, page 14. Today, Whisper became a bridge between sound and silence, between loneliness and belonging. Not a grand structure, but a simple, steady path, content to hold others up while they found their way across, between fear and trust, between lonely souls who believed no one noticed them. Whisper worked his quiet magic. At Maple Pines, Walter Finch greeted us with twinkling eyes and another surprise. "Remember those therapy dog bingo cards?" he asked, unfolding a laminated sheet like a treasured map. Advanced level now. The new challenges included make a nurse laugh, comfort someone without being asked, and become the subject of a painting. Whisper had already accomplished the last one. Resident Earl had spent days capturing Whisper's essence in watercolors, the afternoon light painting gold streaks across his fur in the window seat, though the proportions were slightly off and the ears too small. The portrait radiated the quiet dignity that was Whisper's signature. Earl pressed the painting into my hands, wrapped in brown paper. "Frame it or don't," he said, his knobby fingers trembling slightly. "Just look at it when you forget why goodness matters." It found a home above our fireplace in a simple wooden frame. The Veterans Center introduced us to Denise, a new arrival with shadows in her eyes from overseas service. "She doesn't say much," Hal explained. Thought Whisper might help. Denise sat, coiled tight against the wall, her crossed arms forming armor. Whisper didn't force the issue. He simply existed nearby, a calm presence in her storm. 20 silent minutes passed before she uncurled herself, settling cross-legged beside him. No words, just her palm resting gently on his back as Whisper leaned into the contact, his warmth seeping through her defenses. "You're getting better at this," I told him in the truck afterward. His answering grunt was clearly more about dinner than praise. Our backyard cookout became a neighborhood. A fair Lucas's potato salad, the yellow house couple's lemon bars, and Whisper holding court between lawn chairs like a furry ambassador. When children formed a worshipful circle around him, one whispered, "What do you think he's thinking?" "Probably, you kids are loud." Another giggled. Whisper's dramatic sigh and flop onto his side sent them into delighted laughter, the sound bubbling through the summer air like a brook over stones. That night's journal entry read, page 17. Today, Whisper made children feel included without instructions or fanfare, just a well-timed sigh and the gift of his presence. The mail brought an official certificate from the Therapy Dog Association. Whisper's photo smiling beside a gold seal. He blinked at it twice before resuming his nap, wholly unimpressed by bureaucracy. But my throat tightened, not for the paper, but for the validation that others now saw what I'd known since that first day in Kennel 19. That silence could speak volumes, and presence could heal louder than words. We mounted it beside Earl's, painting the beginning of our Whisper wall, a growing testament to gentle power. October arrived wearing a cloak of crisp air and wood smoke. Whisper developed a new ritual, sitting patiently by the back door each afternoon, not demanding but waiting with the infinite patience of old souls. When I opened the door, he'd ambled to his favorite spot beneath the changing maples, watching gold leaves pirouette to the ground. I kept a wool blanket on the porch bench, ostensibly for me, but really for the way Whisper liked to press his back against its warmth as evening's chill set in. Together, we'd watch the neighborhood winking to life, one glowing window at a time. At the Veterans Center, Hal introduced college students, completing service hours. Their nervous energy filled the room until Whisper settled near the far wall like a grounding stone. Lee, a quiet student, pulled a Polaroid from her pocket, staring at it with trembling lips. "He looked like this," she finally said, extending the photo toward Whisper. "Not exactly. Different ears, but the same. Everything else." When Whisper touched his nose to the faded image, Lee's exhale seemed to release years of pent-up grief. Whisper doesn't talk either, I told Hal later, but he knows how to say what needs saying. That night's journal entry, page 42. Today, Whisper showed someone they could remember without breaking. That's no small miracle. The library's story circle blossomed, with families now driving hours for their turn. Aaron, a dinosaur enthusiast, would sprawl on his shakuk, his small fingers carefully turning pages as Whisper's head rested on his foot. He won't read to me, his mother confessed, watching her son's animated retelling of prehistoric adventures. Not even to his sister, but this dog. He gets 3 full chapters. Whisper listened with perfect attention, occasionally nudging the book with his nose when Aaron paused too long, as if to say, "Go on, I'm listening." The library staff printed a photo of Whisper and Aaron mid-story, pinning it to their community board, where it glowed like a little sun among flyers and announcements. Beneath it, in a child's careful printing, the caption read, "My best reading, buddy." That weekend, we escaped to a nearby lake where a family friend's cabin sat waiting, its wooden walls breathing in the crisp autumn air. I packed our essentials, a cooler of sandwiches, my sleeping bag, and Whisper's favorite blanket, the one that carried the comforting scent of home and all things familiar. The lake lay still as glass, its surface dotted with floating leaves, like nature's copper coins. Whisper stood at the water's edge for a long moment, his nose twitching as he sampled the pine-scented breeze, before settling onto a bed of soft pine needles. While I fished and read and cooked simple meals over crackling flames, Whisper remained still as a sentinel, though his ears turned like radar dishes, tracking every rustling squirrel and creaking branch. That night, we sat shoulder to, beneath a sky so thick with stars, it looked like someone had spilled a salt shaker across black velvet. Whisper leaned into me, not heavily, just enough to say, "I'm here, and this matters." In the cabin's guest book, I wrote simply, "Stayed here with Whisper." The stars felt less lonely. Back in town, the elementary school counselor had a request. Could Whisper join our morning check-ins, she asked, for children who find the school day overwhelming at first light. And so our Tuesday and Thursday mornings began arriving at 7:30 sharp. Whisper's paws whispering across the linoleum as we took our place in the calm corner. Children came and went like tides, some stopping to stroke his fur, others simply sitting nearby in wordless companionship. One misty morning, Joel arrived with tears cutting paths down his flushed cheeks, his small arms locked across his chest, like a drawbridge raised. Whisper didn't force his comfort. He simply lay nearby at a careful angle, leaving space for Joel to choose. 5 silent minutes passed before the boy began inching closer, closer, until finally his trembling hand came to rest on Whisper's back. He hasn't let anyone touch him since his parents' divorce, the counselor whispered later, her own eyes shining. That night's journal entry read, page 48. Today, a locked door opened. Whisper didn't pick the lock. He just waited, patiently, until someone was ready to turn the key. Our Whisper wall at home had blossomed into 2 shelves now. One held treasures from maple pines, paw-painted pumpkins, a crocheted blanket stitched with love by arthritic fingers, and a poem penned by a resident who usually kept her words locked tight. The other shelf brimmed with school offerings, crayon drawings, laminated bookmarks, and a slightly crumpled origami dog labeled, "To Whisper, you make mornings better." I often found myself pausing before this shrine, not to admire, but to bear witness to the quiet revolution one dog had sparked through simple presence at the library. Theo had begun volunteering with younger readers. It was Whisper's idea, he told me seriously. He listens to me, so now I can listen to them. That evening, as Whisper curled into his blanket nest, I murmured, "You're creating echoes, you know." His answering huff sent dust motes dancing in the Lamp light. Mid-October brought a call from Donna, who ran a grief support group. "We don't need him to perform miracles," she said, "just to be." That Thursday found us in a softly lit room where sorrow hung thick as fog. Whisper settled in a corner like a stone in a stream, letting the current of grief flow around him. No one rushed to him, but by evening's end, 3 people had drifted his way, one resting a hand on his back, another weeping into his fur, all finding anchor in his steady warmth. "You don't always need a hug to feel held," Donna told me afterward, her hand gentle on my arm. Whisper proves that. Page 53. I wrote that night at home. Whisper had grown more contemplative lately, not weary, but deeply present. He spent long moments at the hallway window watching the neighbor's oak tree, once tracking a squirrel for 5 unblinking minutes. Making peace with the wildlife, I asked. His ear flicked, but his gaze never wavered. Halloween arrived without costumes. Whisper would never tolerate such nonsense, but the neighborhood children insisted on including him in their parade. We compromised with an orange ribbon around his collar, and he held court on the porch like a furry monarch receiving subjects. A tiny pirate offered him a plastic gold coin, which Whisper accepted with all the gravity of a knight accepting a sacred relic. He carried it to his bed like treasure, then returned to his post as if nothing had happened. Next morning, I found the coin gleaming in his food bowl, his way of sharing the spoils. Page 57. Whisper received a gift and gave it back in the only currency he knows. Kindness. The season's first frost silvered the grass as October waned. I laid rugs by the doors to keep the cold at bay, and Whisper promptly claimed the thickest as his new throne. One evening, as I sipped tea and watched his sides rise and fall in sleep, a thought slipped through me like moonlight through bare branches. All this, every healed moment, every tentative smile, every quiet breakthrough, bloomed from one decision: to look closer, to read a tarnished brass tag. That tag still hangs on his collar, worn smooth by time but never forgotten. Its message now a living truth. If you're reading this, I was loved once, and every day, in every place we visit, that love grows new roots. We went. He was proving with every steady breath, every patient moment that he remained loved, seen, needed, that his work wasn't finished. November arrived as quietly as a falling leaf, the world stripped down to bare branches and skies, the soft grey of well-worn denim. Mornings came slower now, the sun stretching lazily over rooftops and frost-tipped grass. Whisper seemed to move in harmony with the season. No rush, no hurry, just intention. He slept a little longer, stretched a little slower, but his eyes remained bright. Watchful. We kept our routines like sacred rituals. Maple pines on Wednesdays, the school on Tuesdays and Thursdays, the library on Saturdays. But we no longer lingered the way we once had. Whisper did his work with quiet dignity, and when it was done, he'd stand by the door, ready to go home. I never questioned it. One chilly morning, as I sipped coffee on the porch, Whisper settled beside me and rested his chin on my knee. His breath was warm, steady. I scratched behind his ears, the way I had 1,000 times before. "You tired?" I asked. His tail thumped once. We sat like that for a long while. The last of the autumn leaves whispering overhead, the wind brushing past like an old friend. I thought of all the places we'd been, all the hands that had touched his fur, all the people who had sat beside him, needing nothing more than his presence. The journal was nearly full now, 60 pages, each holding something sacred, a memory, a whispered thank you, a moment too precious to leave to time alone. Page 60. Whisper's not just a dog. He's a place people go when they don't know where else to turn. The school counselor called that week. Joel asked if Whisper's coming back after the holidays. She said, "He wants to make him a Christmas card." "He'll be there," I promised. That same day, a letter arrived from the Humane Society. They were honoring Whisper with a community service award, just a certificate, a small ceremony, but they wanted us there. The town hall was warm and bright. Cookies and cider set out on a folding table. Whisper sat beside me as the director spoke about therapy animals, mentioning him by name twice. When she handed me the certificate for offering quiet companionship, healing presence, and hope to those who needed it most, he didn't react. But when a little girl hugged his neck afterward, he leaned into her like he'd been waiting his whole life for that moment. On the drive home, the clouds thickened. By the time we pulled into the driveway, the first snowflakes of the season had begun to fall. They landed on Whisper's fur like tiny stars, soft and cold. He didn't shake them off, just stood there, nose tilted up, taking it in. That night, I lit the fireplace and dragged his blanket closer to the hearth. He curled up without being asked. I sat nearby, reading, glancing up now and then to watch. His ears twitch with dreams. A few days later, at Maple Pines, Walter Finch waited by the window with 2 mugs of cider, one for me, one empty. Just habit now. He looks older, Walter Finch said gently. He is older. Whisper nudged Walter Finch's hand, then lay down beside his chair. Still got it, though, Walter Finch murmured, patting his head. Still doing the work. We stayed longer that day. Something told me we should. That weekend, Whisper didn't come to the library. I let the staff know he wasn't sick. Not exactly, just slower. Still eating, still walking, but quieter. Sunday morning, I made him scrambled eggs and fed him by hand. He licked my fingers gently, then rested his head in my lap. I read aloud from the journal. He stayed still, eyes closed, tails thumping every few pages. That night, he chose to sleep at the foot of my bed, something he hadn't done in weeks. I left the window cracked so he could hear the wind. Monday morning, I woke before sunrise. Whisper was still there, still warm, but he didn't lift his head. I sat beside him, hand on his chest, still breathing, slower now. I'm right here, I whispered. He opened one eye, then the other. I stayed with him, didn't move, didn't speak. Again, the sun rose slowly, pale light spilling across the floor. Whisper let out a long breath, then another dot, and then dash stillness. No sound, no twitch, just peace. I didn't cry right away, just sat there, hand on his side, letting the moment settle. Eventually, I wrapped him in his blanket, the one from the porch, the one that smelled like home. I buried him beneath the maple tree, where he used to sit in the afternoons. At the base of the stone marker, I placed his brass tag. If you're reading this, I was loved once. And beneath it, I added, and loved again. That afternoon, I sat on the porch, alone but not empty. The wind moved through the trees, the same as always, and if I closed my eyes, I could almost hear the soft click of his paws on the steps. In the weeks that followed, I still visited the school, the library, Maple Pines. Not every day, but some people asked about Whisper. Some cried, some smiled. I brought the journal with me. Let them read their own moments, their own stories, their own memories of a dog who never spoke a word, yet somehow whispered exactly what each heart needed to hear. One afternoon, a letter arrived from a young woman who used to sit with Whisper during library hours. I'm studying to become a therapist, she wrote, her handwriting dancing across the page, because of a dog who never asked me to be anything more than myself. Then came a note from the elementary school teacher. Joel still visits the calm corner every morning. He brings a stuffed dog now, says it helps his heart stop shouting so loud. At the grocery store one day, a small boy tugged my sleeve with flour-dusted fingers. You were with the quiet dog, he said solemnly. When I nodded, he added, he made me feel like I was already okay. I knelt until we were You know, I said, brushing flour from his cheek. He made me feel that way too. That evening, I sat before the Whisper wall as golden candlelight danced across its treasures. I added one final piece, a small wooden dog, carved by Walter Finch's trembling hands and donated after his passing. Then I opened a fresh journal, its pages crisp and waiting. On the very first line, I wrote, "Whisper didn't just change lives, he wove them together like threads in a tapestry, showing us how the quietest presence can shout love the loudest dot outside." The wind stirred the maple leaves with a sound almost like ... No, I smiled, almost like the softest wag of a well-loved tail. Every day, countless animals and people are writing their own stories of transformation, stories that deserve to be told. Then you can be part of these powerful journeys by subscribing, so please subscribe for more inspiring tales of hope and second chances. See you in the next video.